Another day of failed technology. So, recording again, better work this time. We are doing systems of agriculture, global systems of agriculture. All right. So, this is all about how food and agricultural products are part of the global supply chain. Not a surprise. So, some countries are highly dependent on exports as commodities, their economy relies on it. Global food distribution, these networks are affected by political relationships, by infrastructure, and by world trade patterns. We're going to discuss those three things, right? And this is an example of what's going on in the world, with the Philippines being a huge supporter of bananas to China, but now Vietnam's taken over that role. And how is that going to change local economies? Right? So globalization has created interdependence between countries. There's some drawbacks to that. There's also some positives to that. You're also less likely to go to war with a country that you're trading agricultural products with. Doesn't mean impossible, right? Watch the news, but it makes it less likely. And you want to try to work with those countries more, right? Because you want your people to have affordable food. So larger countries with developed agricultural areas expand uh, their food products into smaller, less developed agricultural countries. So the top exporters to developing countries are the United States, Brazil, China, and Argentina. And you see here, Argentina exported many things, but they would not export live cattle to be slaughtered elsewhere. They did export beef, but that was slaughtered in Argentina. That ban has just been lifted. This is just a few days ago. So let's see if that changes the meat markets, if you will. Now, countries with climatic advantages, right? Maybe have warm seasons. They export luxury crops to wealthy countries. What are the Louis Vuitton of crops? What are these luxury crops? It's usually crops you don't really need for survival, but you really enjoy them, like coffee. You see all you knuckleheads walk in with your Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks in the morning. You're already addicts in high school, right? The sugar, even bananas, even though that's a food product. Um, so they are usually come from like those low latitude countries. And the southern hemisphere tends to ship food to the northern hemisphere during the winter months. Sometimes that flips, but so think about it, like the strawberry I ate, it's now like an hour ago with all this recording, probably did not come from anywhere near here to be grown recently, unless it was one of those like fancy vertical farms. For those of you in our other class who is studying bias, notice this is about the Russian economy. They're not growing a lot of vegetables and fruits in Russia in the winter, right? Ukraine. So look at the photo that they're going to choose of Putin, right? Of course, they're not going to choose a flattering photo of Putin. Um, and now let's talk about the emphasis on growing ports for exports. If your emphasis is on like we're making this, but primarily for exports, it can create some problems. It can create some economic problems and some environmental problems. So farmers in developing countries often grow luxury crops at the expense of local food crops. So you might not be having enough like of crops for your own people to eat. You're so worried about getting these other luxury crops out to market. Farmers in developing countries often use poor farming techniques and practices just to get these things out. They may not even have access or the capital to invest in things that would make it more environmentally friendly. So some of the things that happen are water pollution, soil erosion, and you want to write down also it was cut off a soil erosion, deforestation. We saw photos from that earlier this unit, and also the salinization of soil. So even though we talk agriculture, we think of like plants and vegetables, just like we saw the cattle from Argentina, fish, right? So Chilean fish about their farming practices causing some environmental concerns. And listen, this is not just in developing countries. Developed countries, if you look up like farms and water pollution, you're going to get a ton of examples of things from the United States. We went over monocropping, right? This is an example, right? If you have this one big monocrop, you're going to have disadvantages of not having other crops available to people where you live. All right, so now political networks and trade networks, they are affect global agriculture as well. Um, This is a lot from the legacy of colonization and neocolonialism, right, and how they affect the agricultural systems today. Agribusinesses, ones that are based in developed countries, often control land and crop production in developing countries, right? Like, hey, if you grow X, Y, and Z, we'll buy it from you. And so they have this influence. Fair trade movements. You ever buy a chocolate bar and decide to buy the one with the fair trade label on it, right? They have tried to promote equality for the producers of crops in developing countries. Might pay a few pennies more, right? That's sort of what it takes to enact these policies, right? Some things, times for things to being cheaper, right, means things might be a little bit more environmentally unfriendly, labor unfriendly, things like that. Relationships between former colonies and their mother countries make trade easier. Usually, sometimes there can still be problems. We'll look at an example later, but that usually does help, right? And this is about avocados in Mexico, right? Infrastructure. This was a typo. I did this at like 10 o'clock last night. That's late for me. Infrastructure affects global agriculture. Should say agriculture. I'll know who listens with the sound on or off when I check the notes for this one. All right. Poor infrastructure in developing countries makes it hard to get their food to market, right? You might be able to get your food to the port to be exported, but there might not be a road to get it to the local market for like the people a town over, right? It's easier to actually get it to the outside world. Crazy, right? Farmers often don't have access to roads, bridges, railways, even like Wi-Fi and electricity, infrastructure that's needed to move crops to a more local market. So most transportation routes connect farmers to ports for export. So if a developing country wants those avocados, they're going to invest money from the farms to the ports, not from the farms to the local markets, right? And this is especially true with growing the luxury items, right? Because they want to make export of those coffee beans, the tea leaves easier. This is about uh, coffee beans imported in the United States from Latin American countries. That's a photo of a farmer in Colombia. So farmers in developed countries can sometimes skip the food products, can ship the food products cheaply across the world, and crops from developed countries are more plentiful and cheaper to buy than local crops in developing countries, right? So it might be easier to buy things from actually further away than to try to make things in your own back door. This is where the note starts, but I'm curious to see who keeps paying attention here. This might be important for maybe like just in crafting an FRQ to have an educated discussion with others, or just for your own curiosity. Ukraine's been in the news a lot now, right? You've seen that from the war the past few years, from Zelensky in the White House this week. Look at this picture of a wheat field in the Ukraine. Does it look familiar? The Ukrainian flag is based off wheat fields against the blue sky. The Ukraine is the world's seventh largest wheat producer. That may be higher. That's with the war at shift. It might be as high as five. Um, but exports billions and billions of dollars worth of wheat. Many of that wheat is to developing countries who has to then import, say, wheat because they're exporting maybe bananas. At the beginning of the war, wheat prices went up a lot, 28%. And now it's sort of stabilized, but it's still about 2 or 3% higher across the globe. Add inflation to that, right? Every penny helps when we're doing the world today. Other things to think about. I'm going to think about potatoes because this may come as a shock to you. When I think potatoes, I think Ireland, I think Idaho, right? But the top exporters of potatoes are actually France and the Netherlands. This is a Netherlands farm. It's not vertical farming. They do have the land for these fields. And also Deutschland for their Kartoffelsalat, all right? That potato salad. And actually, the U.S. imports a lot of potatoes too. Idaho cannot feed us all. Canada. Canada. So if there was to be after that 30-day thing a tariff on Canada, your potato prices would go up and your French fries and all those things. When I think of potato salad, I think of side dishes. I think of 4th of July. And 4th of July, when you eat those side dishes, those burgers, those dogs, think, where did your food get imported from? Could any of these foods also be exported to other countries? As we celebrate our independence, also appreciate our interdependence. And on July 4th, think of me, and I appreciate you guys for being very respectful and not asking questions. I've heard other people have hushed conversations in the hallway. July 4th is also the due date. All right, see you in class.